And welcome to another edition of the Slave Food Conversations with the Doctors. For those of you who are new to the Slave Food Project, we welcome you to another episode of Slave Food Conversations. We're two African American physicians, Dr. Columbus Batiste, interventional cardiologist, and Eric Walsh, family medicine physician and public health doctorate, explore the role of racism as a unique form of stress and the weaponization of food in the creation of health disparities in the African American communities, irrespective of income. They discovered that eating a whole food plant-based diet is the key to longevity. Tonight, we are joined by our special guest, Dr. Brittany Alexander, who is a wife, proud mother of two, and an avid lover of books. She is a Southern California native and general psychiatrics in Riverside, Corona service area. At a young age of 7, Dr. Alexander knew her calling, mixing medicines and potions for her siblings in the backyard. At age 17, she decided to pursue a career as a psychiatrist. Fast forward through summers spent in the MIFS and summer research programs at Loma Linda University, Dr. Alexander then received her BS in biology from Oakwood University. She completed medical school at Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee, with honors in psychiatry, internal medicine, and growth development and aging. Dr. Alexander then enjoyed her return home to Southern California and entered an internship and residency in general psychiatry at Harbor UCLA Medical Center, with additional rotations in child and adolescent mental health. 2 months after the birth of her firstborn, Dr. Alexander became a board-certified psychiatrist and began a career with Southern California Permanente Medical Group, Kaiser Permanente. Nearly 9 years after joining, Dr. Alexander wears many hats with Kaiser. As a member of the several teams, including the pain management, consultation and liaison, drug safety oversight, physician well-being, physician leadership, physician education committees, and most recently, Dr. Alexander can be seen in several televised medical media appearances with various local and national news networks, online and in newspapers, where she shares her passion for mental health.
Well, here shortly. All right, Dr. Alexander, it is a pleasure to have you on with us, man. It's been a long time coming. We have been waiting to have someone brilliant like yourself join us on this show and talk about mental health. So thank you again.
Oh, you're very welcome. I've shared this before, but you're definitely my Kaiser role model, trying to be like you. And I appreciate your mentorship and your influence over the years. So thank you for having me on.
No problem. I'll send you that little check in the mail a little bit later on for those kind words. Eric, how are you doing? World travel.
Doing well. It's almost summertime in New England, so it's good times now.
All right, that's good. I'm not going to ask you about your sleep, right? Yeah. You know, I think the last time we got together, we were talking about sleep. So
it's after, it's late here, so it's all good. It's all good.
Yes.
We end up talking about that today too. So
all right. Well, yeah, we have so much that's on the docket here today. And I'll be honest, I had my own initial intentions on the direction of this conversation. And just being transparent with everyone, the events that have unfolded out of Texas just this past week, the events that unfolded out of Buffalo. Yeah. The events that unfolded in California in the church. I mean, it's just really reshaped in terms of the things I think we need to discuss, the trauma that's been there, and really this most recent. You have young kids, right?
I do. I have an 8-year-old and a little baby who's 1.
Oh, wow. That's fresh. This world is something else. I mean, I guess just starting out, how do you talk to your son about the events that transpired in Texas? Or do you?
Well, to be honest, in my own personal life, I have not yet. And what I would advise parents to do is to gauge it. So if your child is asking you questions, that's an obvious door that needs to be opened for a discussion. With my son, he's a little bit prone to anxiety and over-worriedness. So I'm very careful to introduce things a little bit slowly and to only give the information that he needs to have at the time. Because of his he feels very responsible for everyone in the world. And so you got to know your kid, number one. Eventually, yes, there's going to have to be a discussion with Elliot about what happened. And I'm going to pose it kind of like a status check. Babe, what have you heard? What are you thinking? What are the other kids saying? And how does that make you feel? When I speak with Elliot about his emotions, I always try to ask him about his mental thoughts, but also his body sensations. Does it make your tummy feel funny? Do you feel anything in your chest? Do you feel tingly? So that we always are teaching him to equate the mind-body connection. And so that if other signals are coming in, he may be able to say, well, that might actually be me being worried about something. Maybe I should bring it up to my mom. So that's the long answer. The short answer is know your kid and bring it up in a manner that befits their temperament.
Yeah, that I think that's wise. That's sage advice. I haven't yet had the conversation with my own kids who are much older than your kids right now. It's not something that we've had an open discussion about this past week about what's transpired. But I think one of the things you brought up is the fact of how this really takes hold and it kind of starts to manifest on us, and folks, they carry this burden around with them in terms of this stress. And I mean, I stumbled on this unique idea, and I was thinking about it because I've heard about mirror neurons and I've talked about it. I've read some research on it, but really this idea of almost secondhand trauma. Secondhand trauma. And speak to us a little bit about that for those who may not be familiar with that term.
So, I was the most familiar in terms of being a physician, and the three of us can very much relate in terms of something happens to your patient, but you're the second victim. We actually have a second victim program at Kaiser for healthcare providers who have lost a patient or been involved with caring for someone else who had a trauma. But you're absolutely right. It does extend to non-healthcare providers as well. We are, especially since 2020, just absolutely bombarded with negativity and stress and fear and our own suffering, yet also other people's suffering. And the vast majority of us who don't have antisocial traits are going to be able to have some empathy. But sometimes that empathy can then be encoded as stress. And there's nowhere really to put it if it's someone else that you're watching. We're very capable of, one of the few things that actually can increase your happiness is to listen to and watch other people be happy as well. That's one of the few things. I was reading a study about that, but it also goes to the opposite. If you're watching a lot of people being in trouble and suffering and death and sadness, that also can influence your mood. So I think just to be aware of that we're empathic human beings, we are designed to be part of a community. We have unconscious responses to nuanced facial expressions and the tones of people's voices, and all these things from babyhood, we learn how to respond to. And it's not a bad thing, but to be aware of it.
Yeah. And I would just jump in. I think, something that was said that is very wise is, just, you don't have to actually jump right in and explain everything to your child, which is what some parents do. And you can literally traumatize your child when, in fact, the way these news cycles go, in a day or two, it won't even be in the news anymore. And you can maybe even have a better conversation around violence in general than around some of these specific things. It's really shocking. I saw a post where they said, we had a longer media cycle around the Chris Rock, Will Smith incident than we did around the shootings at the grocery store in Buffalo.
Yeah.
10 people, I think it was, African Americans lost their lives there, and it was in the news for less than 48 hours, and they moved on. Yeah. So, what we tell our kids is important, but you do have to be careful because, when I was a kid, they would always warn you about getting kidnapped and people taking kids and doing stuff to them. And that did spook me. It may have saved my life because anybody pull up with a van, I took off running, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, we don't want to scare our kids either. It's a tough thing because at the same time, you do want to make sense of it. But I like what was said. If they come asking you questions, I mean, that definitely is a clear sign it's time to start giving some answers.
Absolutely.
And we owe them the truth, not what we hope we'd be able to say. The truth to the level that they can handle it.
Right.
Detail is as appropriate.
But I mean, when I think about this whole idea of secondhand stress and the things that really kind of transpire, it kind of brings back. I remember my father-in-law said to me once, he was like, "Columbus, do you ever get happy when a black boxer wins a fight?" And I was like, "No, not really. I don't really care." But I wasn't from that generation, and so the what he was getting to was he was getting to the fact that you equate yourself to images that you see in television and media, and you put yourselves in an empathetic position there with the successes as well as the traumas. And so seeing that, I've seen studies, and Eric and I, we speak about it a lot inside the Slave Food Project, really about the impact of stress and visualizing trauma, whether or not it comes from authorities, whether or not it comes from individuals, and the impact it has on individuals. But I've seen there's actually literally a recent study that came out equating just what we speak about in terms of the visual trauma inside a community with increased policing and brutality, and seeing what translates over into those who have not suffered it directly, but just by observing it, and that whole process that begins. It's mind-blowing in terms of the impact of the domino effect of stress and these traumatic events like this.
Well, and yes, but the other thing the other thing to think about is that when we now start to localize it to the African American community, at any time it could be us or parents of children, young children. You do start to say, my kid goes to a school. I'm watching this happen to this school, or I'm Black. Ooh, I don't want to get a ticket. I'm a doctor. I live in a safe neighborhood, but I do everything I can not to get stopped by a police officer.
I do too.
It's absolutely terrifying.
Absolutely.
The thought is terrifying to me.
Absolutely do too.
And so you're right that we, on one hand, it may not be completely relevant to us, but then at any point, any of these things, especially with gun violence, racial violence, could be relevant to any of us at any time.
Yeah. I was thinking, when I'm driving on the freeway, I literally am always looking. Doesn't matter if I'm going the speed limit or not. I'm always looking like, okay, is there something? Am I okay? What am I going to do? Where's my registration and license and everything like that? Just knowing in advance.
Yes.
And I would tell you get Waze if you're not. Because it'll warn you where the police are. But this is a part of what when a Slave Food Project, we talk about allostatic load.
Yes.
So allostasis is the ability to adjust to try and keep everything normal, to maintain homeostasis. We carry allostatic load, and I recently went and got like my license plates for my car for the state of Connecticut, and did some other stuff. And I tell you what, part of the reason was I was like, you know what? I don't want anybody pulling me over because I have out-of-plate tags, and you go and do it. And I think what you have to understand, there is a burden of stress that is unique when the motivation for you to do certain things are driven by your fear of consequences that otherwise would not exist. That is a profound place to land. And so we carry this burden of stress. And I want to throw this in there as well. We are excusing a lot of the senseless violence. And let me say this is so much bigger than race, what we're dealing with in violence right now. I mean, Buffalo was a clear indication. The church in South Carolina was a clear indication. I think even the church in California recently was actually an ethnic, difference or nationalism, whichever one. Taiwanese. But think about this. It doesn't matter. No matter how you slice this person today, from what I understand, the shooter was the same ethnic background as the elementary school he went into. We live in a society where violence has been really normalized. When I was a child, you watched Tom and Jerry cartoons and all that. Violence has been served to us as if it is normal and entertaining. The video games haven't helped that. Now, I'm not saying the video games make you violent, but maybe they do something to those who have this proclivity. And I just read something that was saying one of the biggest mistakes we're making as a society is to blame mental health on these shootings, because people with mental health issues are actually, well, from what I was reading, no more likely to go out and shoot someone as anyone else. But people with a history of anger, violent outbursts, domestic abuse. There's certain things that you could go through. Those people, if you did a background check, those people would be. So we're in a place where society is going to have to do something different. And this is one of those cases where we can't just blame poor mental health and say, well, if we fix mental health, all of this stuff will stop happening, because something else is going on.
I agree. There are some factors. First of all, I can't not say this. I did some research as well, and I was so disappointed. Is that the word? I don't know. I was just down to find out that the U.S. is far and above the ratio of guns to people, far and away above the top of the top 10 in the world. It's something ridiculous, like 120 guns per 100 people. And then I find out that only some small percentage of people, like less than 50% want tighter gun control in certain polls that were administered. And it's incredibly disturbing because it's very easy to get a gun. When we look at these shooters, there are some things they have in common. And I agree with Dr. Walsh that they are not necessarily diagnosable with mental health, with a mental illness. A lot of these fall into this slippery middle category. So, like, obviously anyone who walks into a school is not the beacon of mental health. Okay, we can't.
No, exactly.
He's fine. He's not fine, but he may not fit any of the DSM-5 criteria for a diagnosable bipolar schizophrenia. It's not those people who are doing it, and I agree. And that we need to help to continue to destigmatize mental health for these lovely people as well. However, there are some elements that still may be present. Stressful life events as a child, adverse life events as a child, a recent insult or stressful event, being prone to anger, having some sort of a vendetta, being a male, and they do happen to mostly be Caucasian. I'm not saying that's a static factor. We can't do anything about that. And then also we make them notorious in the media. We make them notorious. And so there's a secondary gain for these people because a lot of them are suicidal. They may not meet criteria for DSM-5 diagnosis, but a lot of them have nothing to lose. So they're going down, but their name is going up on that billboard. So there are a lot of like almost like a rock climbing wall, sticking points where we can pull ourselves out of this issue if we'll address certain aspects of this phenomenon. The other thing, Columbus, Dr. Batiste, we were saying off camera, I think, we've had a rash of these, and it apparently is that some of these perpetrators are mimicking what the others have done. And so it's almost like it's a good time to have a mass shooting. Oh, they just did this. This is my time right here. And so we've got to stop glorifying the excessive amounts of violence. We are a violent country. It's scary. It's terrifying. And it's enabling these people to continue to have their outbursts and to take lives.
Yeah. So. I mean, just even the conversation. I mean, as we talk about this and the impact, I mean, I go back to, May 25th is the 2-year anniversary of George Floyd's death, right? His murder. Yeah. And, I think back to that time 2 years ago. My son is 15. He was around 13 or so then. And I live in a gated community, right? And not that it's all fancy or anything of that sort, but my son was literally afraid to walk to the mailbox. My son, when I would ride in the car, and if I would exceed the speed limit by any degree, he said, "Dad, what are you doing? Do you want to get pulled over by the police?" This is the impact, the domino effect. And so when we look at studies now, when we've all kind of looked at various things, nearly 8 out of 10 African Americans feel someone in their family or someone they know is going to be traumatized based upon their race. That's a horrible statistic, a horrible way, Eric, as you speak about just like that allostatic load that we carry around with us and what it does to us of this chronic undulating stress that's there, And
what happened in Buffalo? is that really does stress you out, because you think, man, you could
Sure.
literally be anywhere where Black people are congregated, and this guy has now set a precedence
Yes.
Mhm.
for a copycat, for somebody to walk into a church again, which has happened already,
Yeah.
or a concert or whatever, and do the same thing. And you know, this is why one of the things my medical opinion, as well as my personal opinion, this is one of the reasons why faith is so important.
Yeah.
You have to have somewhere to bring this stuff. I don't know how people do it without it. But there's the studies are pretty overwhelming as well. I mean, you having a belief system and a belief in something bigger than yourself is protective in a sense, because I don't know how people navigate this without it. I mean, without being able to pray and talk through this in a faith context, because and it just happens so often and so much. And we have young people who are crying out for help. I mean, I think both of these young men, but definitely the one in Buffalo, there was a trail of things that happened that should have caused someone to pull them aside and definitely not allow them to have a gun.
Absolutely.
So we're in trouble from that perspective.
Absolutely. And we haven't mentioned social media, but one of them, there was a bevy of social media posts. And I'm just thinking, at any point, somebody could have just said, hey, are you, what's happening here? And it seems like so many things failed. So many things are failing all the time. And not everyone is of the same mind of how to address it. And I think for me, that's scary, because when are we going to decide to do something?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the scariest thing, and when there are people saying, well, if they, in terms of gun laws, if we take away our guns, they're going to take away all our other freedoms. I'm like, at what point do you say, okay, enough? People are getting killed. Let's deal with the other freedoms separately, because this is getting crazy. You have people who are right now celebrating, change, the potential, change for Roe v. Wade. We'll stay out of it because they want to protect life, but then okay with everyone having guns and shooting a place. Like the dichotomy of thinking, if life is precious, life is precious. Let's get rid of the guns so that this kind of stuff stops happening. We live in a very weird, kind of fragmented society where solutions are very difficult to come across, because everybody comes in with these bigger ideologies that sometimes have nothing to do with the problem. So, I guess I would want to focus, the next bit of our conversation around what should we be doing to really garner good mental health right now. What should people be doing in a time of stress? And it's not just this violence. We are looking at gas prices that are astronomical right now across the country. Interest rates are going up. Inflation is up. Stock market. I was just met with a doctor I was with yesterday, and he's like 30% of his retirement portfolio just vanished. So people are stressing out over a lot of different things right now. But what do we do? I mean, how do we approach this? And particularly for African Americans, but I think, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. What should people really be doing right now to try and preserve good mental health, or get it if they don't have it?
So many ways to answer that question. A million ways. Where am I going to? Okay, I'm going to start here. You've got to know yourself, right? So you've got to be at least able to do a little bit of what I like to call it a little body scan or a little status check. A lot of people come to me and they're telling me this, and this, and they're like, what's wrong with me? And I'm like, you're stressed. And they're like, no, I'm not. I'm like, but you're here. And so you have to really know yourself and come to the conclusion that you may not be feeling as tip-top as you would want to, and that for right now, that's normal. The depression rates tripled during the pandemic. The suicide rate is higher than ever. And you're in bad company in terms of not feeling well. It's expected almost in this situation. It's a very hard situation. One of the things I try to teach folk is a little bit of acceptance of, I am in a tough spot. This is very hard. This does not feel good. There's nothing wrong with me because I don't like this, or I'm having symptoms, or I'm having depression or anxiety. This is very hard. I'm not really designed to deal with stress in the chronicity and the severity of which it is happening to me. I need help, and that's okay. So we have to get that out of the way. I really recommend for people to advocate for themselves. The pandemic has affected everyone, including doctors. We are second victims right now. We are also dealing with our families and our little kids and our jobs and our spouses and whatever else. And nobody wants to miss anything. And I promise doctors, by and large, really care about our patients and whether you all are okay. But you still, please speak up for yourself. If no one asks you, but you know something isn't right, you go ahead and say, hey, can we talk about this or this? I'm feeling this. Could I have a referral? What are your thoughts on this? If you're feeling uncomfortable with a psychiatrist or a mental health provider, just start with a primary care physician. Dr. Walsh, I'm sure that you see a ton of depression and anxiety in your
absolutely do.
And of course, you know the intricate correlation between cardiac and mental health. And so really just reaching out to any doctor at this point is fine. A good place to start. Now, I love your message here, and having good mental health is completely in line with what you two gentlemen are preaching and trying to disseminate. I wish I had more time. I'm going to prepare a lecture, Columbus. I'm going to prepare a lecture. I'm so excited about it. I cannot wait to give it to somebody. Oh, there are so many things that happen in the brain. Literal physical changes with the neurons, the dendrites, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex. I would just keep going on if time would allow me. That are physiologic changes that occur, structural changes that occur, neurogenesis, neurodegeneration, overexpression of neurofibrillary plaques and tangles, right? The apoepsilon gene overexpression and toxicity. All of these changes occur in relation to chronic stress. And one of the biggest things that responds to chronic stress in the brain is insulin resistance. You have lifestyle issues. You're insulin resistant in the body, then you're insulin resistant in the brain. And that can lead to more depressive symptoms, less healthy neurons, poor memory, accelerated aging, lower energy, all of it physiologically. And so what you're doing to your body, you also need to remember is happening to your brain. So how do we continue to handle stress? Advocate for yourself, be self-aware, eat a good diet. Eat a diet low in processed sugars and processed foods and animal fats, and high in fiber, natural fibers from plants and proteins from plants, and healthy fresh water and not soda or juice. Very, very basic. Don't smoke, because stress is very inflammatory, and anything else that you're doing to add to that inflammation. Excitatory hormones, glucocorticoids, are inflammatory. That's what happens when you're stressed. And then also to exercise. And I'm going to pause because there's ever so much more, because I want you guys to talk too. But I just want to say, the lifestyle is more important than ever it was before, right here and right now, for mental health and physical health together, because they're one continuum.
Yeah, I can't agree more with what you said. I went into cardiology to deal with one singular organ in the center of the chest. And what I have found throughout my practice is the fact that there is such a huge connection with the mental health of individuals. It's so interrelated. And it's hard to avoid. And so I find myself in many of my clinic visits of just actually listening and dealing with the stress, the trauma, the various things that are there. And you brought up these adverse childhood events, these ACE, that really just have a horrible tentacles throughout all of a person's life that's there. But I think there's power and there's hope in what you mentioned. And one of the simple things I do, and then I'll pass on to Eric, is I start off with I've become enamored with breathing, right? And the power of the breath. And so we understand that when you exhale, that you actually are activating your parasympathetic system. And so as you activate the parasympathetic system, which is basically the alternative to the sympathetic tone, that fight or strike, you tone it down. So that means that now I'm actually being beneficial. This is what speakers do before they get up and speak, unless you're Dr. Walsh and you
I do it all the time.
You came up out the womb.
I do breathing exercise all the time before I to speak.
Yeah, because it calms you down in those nerves, and it is so powerful. You can see the response immediately. And so that's one of the key things I speak to about, and I try and train some of the nurses I work with to kind of advise the patients to as well. And there's many others. They exercise, and I actually hate the word exercise. I shouldn't say hate, but I despise the word exercise, and I like to characterize it as being active, because you don't have to exercise. Exercise carries a negative connotation, but we always say you just simply have to move. If you're moving more than you're sitting, you're going to glean benefit, and that's why study after study shows this beneficial effect, especially if it's outdoors and that green activity and getting the sunlight and so forth. But yeah, there's power that's there and that rest too as well. But Eric, chime in.
So there's a few things I would add in. Let me write this down so I don't forget it. One of them is one of my favorite sayings when I'm doing health talks: food is the most overused antidepressant. Exercise is the most underused anxiolytic.
That's right.
And so what we know from the science is that, and it's not just food, even though I will say good food actually is antidepressant. The problem is we talk about the stress equation. Stress equals demands minus resources. People are using false resources. So you get depressed and you're going to reach for a Twinkie or a Snickers bar. It's going to feel good in the moment. But like alcohol feels good in the moment when you're trying to drown your sorrows, alcohol literally sedates you, turns off the frontal lobe of the brain earliest on, and then also cuts off other parts of the brain. You're not going to solve any problems or fix anything by drinking alcohol. You probably actually only going to make the problems worse. So finding a way to eat the healthy foods and avoiding those foods that actually don't work to help you with your whatever it is you're going through, and getting out and being excessively active, really pushing yourself to where you release those endorphins to naturally make the brain begin to feel better. That's the first thing. The second thing is community. I think one of the secrets as to how Black Americans got through slavery, Jim Crow, failed Reconstruction, all of the highlights and lowlights of the civil rights movement, extreme economic discrimination, and imagery in society that really told us we were less than, and not beautiful, not attractive. How did we get through all of that? Community. It was fellowship. It is a powerful tool to protect your mental health, to have a body of people who love you, family and beyond. And one of the reasons church is so important for Black people is not simply the religious part of it. It is the fellowship and the community part of it. The fact that you go somewhere and there are people who love you, people you can lean on, and you have a body of people outside of work, outside of your neighborhood, in many cases, who you can attach to. So I really strongly recommend people, in fact, biblically, it actually says it: forsake not the assembling of yourselves together, is what the book of Hebrews actually says. That's a powerful mental health tool. And the final thing really kind of ties on to that. It is that faith component. If you feel all alone, one of the things I found, and I don't do family medicine. I actually run urgent cares. We have now 24 of them here in the state. We first line of defense a lot of times. I see teenagers come in with severe mental health issues, depression, suicidal, cutting themselves. We're the first ones. They haven't seen anyone, and their parents are bringing them to us because they don't know where else to bring them. What I find is unique and scary at the same time is how many of them have no concept of a purpose for their life. They have nothing. They're just alive, and their only measure of the value of their life is what other people think of them, how they're viewed online, how they're viewed in school. And I'm very thankful myself, growing up in the church, that I was taught that what matters most is what God thinks of me. And that's why, Jesus says, listen, take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I'm meek and lowly in spirit. He says, for my burden is easy and my yoke is light. And that is powerful. So there's somewhere I can take things. And I really hurt for these young people they have nowhere to take it. And they're judging themselves against Kardashians and, rappers and singers and celebrities that they'll never measure up to. They feel less than, and it does not, obviously it's not good for their mental health. So, I think setting realistic, expectations around life, but definitely having that faith component to really help you see life the way someone with purpose does see it.
So I'm going to say unintentionally, and Brittany, I will turn it back over to you to chime in. But Eric, you just brought up components of the Blue Zone, right? Mm-hmm. So Blue Zone talks really about eating a plant-predominant diet, as you did, Dr. Mm-hmm. Alexander. It talks about a sense of belonging. It talks about a sense of purpose. It talks about all these aspects are about activity on a regular basis that's there. It talks about community, the power of community. And we look at isolation, and what really happens in literature that Eric, you brought out, is just like layered in literature that's there, and it's coming out increasingly more and more and more about. I saw one study that was done that said being in isolation, being lonely, it equates to smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of its impact on your health from a negative standpoint. And so we have to come together as a community. And you look at the Hispanic or Latino paradox, always curious, like why? And certain communities that were there, but yet still able to fight disease. And you look at the work that's being done out of Morehouse, the MECA trial, that what they're doing, and they're looking at African-American communities, and they're finding where are the components of resilience, of cardiovascular resilience, despite living in communities when you normalize for the income. And what they find is just this, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. And when they see these things here, these same ideal components, people tend to do better. There's power in the simple things. That's what's so beautiful about the message that we're all trying to deliver, is that we can come together and we can put up a force field to protect us, so to speak, from all of these attacks that are being sent against us.
Yeah. I agree. I agree with and echo with both with what you both have said. I consider myself a holistic psychiatrist because very rarely in fact, I've just started to straight up tell people this pill is going to help. You need to take it. But this is how much it's going to help, and this is how much you need to do. And I think that rings true. We need to look at everything. And I agree. Community, if it is a person's preference, some sort of a spiritual belief, a faith, if one feels they can genuinely have one, absolutely. Looking at the influence of social media, looking at our goals and values, looking at our physical health and all of it. I want to be careful because there may be folks who are watching who feel that they have really tried to optimize these things. And we can't change our ACEs. We can't change our genetics, whether you have the short version of the serotonin transporter allele, whether you have a short and long, or you know what I mean? Like you can't change your MAOI receptors. Some things you come into the world with. And then because of stress, and there's, this epigenetic activation of, different expressions of different genes. So there's a lot that's outside of our control. We've talked about some of the things that we may have more control over, but I just want to say, look, if people have been struggling, one component that I do have to plug is good quality mental health care. Yeah. All of these wonderful, extremely necessary things are not in lieu of your mental health care. They are alongside with it. It's a relay. You're going to pass the baton here. You've got your primary care doctor. You've got your trainer or your friend that you walk with. You've got your friend that you call when you're sad. You've got your pastor or your elder. Got your psychiatrist and your therapist. And so I want to say that, and I wish I just had more time to go into how okay it is to take a prescribed medication as prescribed from a competent licensed mental health professional, or to engage in therapy. Therapy is so excellent, clinically validated, many different modalities. I wish I had more time to get into all of them. We can't separate the two. So I'll pause there because that's another lecture.
Well, we have a couple questions that we wanted to ask you. And one of them is, what does stress do to the brain?
We touched on that a little. I want to really stress, pun intended, that there are changes, especially in the amygdala and the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, that there's this hormone called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that can cause, if there's enough of it, can cause our neurons to be plump and healthy and to communicate well with one another, especially in the hippocampus, which affects our memory, our cognitive function, and our emotions. If there's a high level of glucocorticoid or cortisol in the brain over too much time, that BDNF level goes down and those neurons begin to have fewer dendritic connections. They're not as plump, they're not as reactive, and our neuroplasticity can decrease. In other situations, as in the orbitofrontal cortex, sometimes we actually have our neurons become overactive. And so they're hypervigilant, as in the case of PTSD. But these are actually physiologic changes that are occurring in response to stress. There are many, and for the sake of time, I can't go through them all, but there are many, many physiologic changes that occur in the brain as a result of stress hormones, norepinephrine, glucocorticoids, glutamate, GABA, acetylcholine, and dopamine and serotonin changes. And we should not feel that we're responsible for consciously mitigating all of these processes, which is why I go back to lifestyle and good mental health treatment, because there does come a point where there needs to be an intervention if some of these processes are going off the tracks.
Okay. And so how do you know if you have chronic stress versus depression and anxiety?
Well, okay, here's how I'm going to answer that.
Okay.
I'm just going to get a little clinical and say the symptoms that you're having. So I think literally anyone who has, and there have been people who did not survive the pandemic, and so I mean that respectfully, but anyone who has survived the pandemic is automatically under chronic stress. Just check that box.
Okay.
It really has to do with our ACEs that we talked about, our early adverse childhood events, our the ego structure of our personality, our cerebral architecture, our ability to delay gratification, our ability to cope with stress, that goes into whether or not, and our genetics that you can't help, whether or not at a certain point we hit our melting point and go from chronic stress, which may produce, some irritability, some issues with sleep, some issues with appetite, maybe not having the greatest time, but still very much functioning. That's how I conceptualize chronic stress. Into meeting criteria for depression and anxiety, which is where one's lifestyle and function are starting to become very impacted by these physiologic and these mental symptoms that one can have. Okay.
And do you have, if you were to maybe categorize maybe top 5 strategies to improve mental health and how a person can deal with stress, what would those top 5 be?
Yes, I think the three of us have agreed. Your diet, what you're eating, end up being 6. Not smoking, getting good quality, consistent, deep sleep as much as humanly possible. Your community, as Eric said, in terms of your connectivity with other humans, if you're part of a church or a spiritual belief or a faith, very important. And it's going to be 6. Exercise, and Columbus has stressed for those who are exercise phobic, although hard exercise does have its mental health benefits, but I don't want to scare our patients. So just the activity. And then the last one is when needed, and the vast majority of people will need it at some point in their life, obtaining good, high quality mental health care, either in the form of therapy and or medication.
Okay. And so your thoughts are that at some point in everyone's life, therapy is going to be necessary?
The data tells us that roughly 60% of people, by the time they've lived and passed away on this earth, will have experienced some sort of diagnosable mental health disorder. It may not be, severe chronic schizophrenia, but vast majority of people at some point could probably benefit from even just a little bit of short-term intervention, therapy, support.
Okay. And then could potentially be life triggering. So for instance, like, when someone loses a loved one, or if they go through, something significant in their lives, in terms of like when you might want to seek out that type of help?
Absolutely. There are people adjust to stressors in different ways. And we are really not designed for chronic stress. Please feel guilty if you're out there and you're watching and you're having a mental health problem or stress or anxiety, and you just feel like you can't quite get it together. We are designed to hit it and keep it moving, get rid of the bear, get rid of the stress, vanquish the thing that's coming up to get you, beat it, and get back to homeostasis. Mm-hmm. That's not happening. Almost any organism at a certain point after a while is going to start to show signs of stress.
Okay. And, if we're looking even at the African-American community as a whole, it's kind of like, okay, get over it, deal with the resilience, Black girl magic or whatever the case may be, right? Just work through it, push through it. It's viewed sometimes as a sign of weakness, that you need help. But you're basically saying that is absolutely false.
Absolutely not. It's like, would you ask a type 1 diabetic to turn their pancreas back on?
Right.
Just make your pancreas work. Mm-hmm. It's just as physiologic as a fractured bone, or acne, or even a more serious problem. It really, really is.
Absolutely. And that message is really important for us to be able to share. Mm-hmm. So thanks for your time and the questions, and I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Yeah. No, thanks, Jeanette. I think one of the things as we kind of wrap everything up here this evening, we appreciate you so much for being on.
Yes.
And just, the drop in science, literal science.
I'm a nerd.
No, I love it. I love it. I love it.
Awesome.
And it's because this stuff, it makes sense. I think that's the power of it. Is just kind of equating, making it practical, but then bringing back the science to it, and then methods for folks to kind of improve. And so, you've already done it, and that kind of ended on the high note in terms of your top 5, but we usually like to kind of do a round robin of just kind of like, what's the word of encouragement, that the last word of hope that we can deliver to someone, whatever the topic is. And so, give us that, give us where folks can find you, or what, if you're doing that social media thing, or giving advice anywhere, or just they need to just check you on local CNN. Is that what they need to do?
Well, I admittedly have kept it a little bit low key. So I work with Kaiser Permanente. I'm an SCPMG physician in the Riverside and Corona service areas. If you happen to have that insurance, I'm happy. I'm thinking if I'm taking patients, I can. I'm happy to see you and to discuss options for your care, or to help you find someone who may be suitable. I sometimes will speak around local churches. I don't have a social media. I'm starting to think I might have to get one. And yes, you could find me usually doing my rounds on the news. I usually go on ABC 7 and CBS in the mornings, occasionally once a month or so, delivering messages. I'm happy to answer questions, and I don't mind if Dr. Batiste provides my email address for further questions. I just want to just say that, look, our brains are very plastic. They are made to heal. Just because something is going on right now does not mean that you're always going to feel this way, this bad, just right here, right now. So I need you to stick around and get the help that you need so that the future versions of yourself can look back and say, look how far I've come. Remember the future version of yourself where things can always get better.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much. Eric, you want to leave the folks with a good message on the way out?
I think one of the things that Dr. Alexander said that resonated with me is when she said, know yourself.
Yes.
You know, I am, as someone who preaches the gospel, I really like for people to know God, but difficult to know anything if you don't really know yourself, especially when it comes to seeking help. I think that was some of the simple, but it was very profound advice tonight, because you have to know when you're not feeling well, and you have to be, you know, for lack of a better term, you have to be humble enough to actually go in and get help. Some of the barriers to going to, I'm a very strong believer. When I speak in church, I talk a lot about the importance of therapy, counseling, and mental health services, because there's a lot of roadblocks. A lot of people see it, a lot of men see it as kind of weak and not something you don't want to do. Something's wrong with you. Some women, you know, have their issues around it and they don't want to face the pain that they've, you know, had pain. That goes for men too. But there are counselors and therapists that if you take your time, you can find one that really does work for you. There are, you know, I've known African Americans like, well, I don't want to go to someone who doesn't understand my plight. Well, there are African American psychiatrists, therapists, etc. Christians will say, well, you know, I'm not going because they don't, you know, they're not going to understand how I believe about life. There are Christian health professionals in the mental health arena as well. There really is no excuse. And I want to really encourage people to do that, because there's power in letting these things, it's letting some of this stuff off your chest. But I'm going to come back to it. You got to know yourself. You got to know when you're burning out. You got to know when it's too much. You got to know when you need help, because no one's going to, I shouldn't say it like this. It's highly unlikely someone's going to come to you and say, hey, you need help. I'm here to supply it, and I'm going to figure out how to get it to you. The challenge, of course, is mental health professionals, at least where I am here in New England, and in our healthcare system, it is it's very difficult to find one. We have many young ladies in our churches who are, professional mental health licensed people, and they're like, our clinics are booked months in advance. But that doesn't mean the individual shouldn't keep trying, shouldn't get on the waiting list, and make sure that they get in, because once you're in, they'll see you. So I want to encourage you to know yourself and be humble and ask for help when you need it.
Yes. And I'll just echo what's been said in terms of knowing yourself, in terms of being an advocate. Yep. I think that too as well. You have to take time for yourself, right? To prioritize yourself. And by taking time for yourself to recharge, when we talk about the aspects of feeding your body with fuel that it can perform, with taking time to rest, taking time to breathe, taking time to connect to a belief, a faith. These things take time, and we think that it's wasted time by sleeping. But the actuality is that it's beneficial to your being. It's beneficial to your mind, body, and soul. And so by doing that, you deserve it. And so I tell patients all the time, you deserve it. You deserve those moments to yourself that can help you rejuvenate and be the best version of you, of what you're meant to be on this planet, right? Our time is short. And so we're meant for a purpose, and living that purpose is the goal. So this has been a beautiful time here with you. It's been bringing us back and recentering us in terms of what we need to do for our mental health. It starts and stops with our brain. It really does.
Everything does.
So,
and I want to say publicly, please tell your mom I say hello. She's a wonderful person, and she must be so proud of you. You are a phenomenal spokesperson for mental health, so classy, so intelligent, and we appreciate you coming on and sharing with us. And I know our audience is really going to be blessed by a lot of everything you shared tonight. So thank you so much.
I really enjoyed this. I'll come back anytime. I like to talk.
All right. Don't put that out there now. We're going to take you up on it.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much for having me.
All right. Appreciate you. We'll connect soon.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.